Hello and welcome to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm Jack Leager, President and CEO of the museum, and I want to thank you all for being here with us, our partner and presenter of today's event, Freedom and Tyranny, Tablet Magazine, and our speakers for today's talk, Bernard-Henri Lévy and Natan. Let me also recognize in our audience two people I want to single out. One of the founders of the museum, George Klein, and ex-chairman of the ADL and board member of the museum, Abe Foxman. Both names that these people know well. We at the museum are committed to our mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and Jewish heritage before, during, and since the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, resistance and injustice, and renewal. We hope we will spend some time here at the museum and visit our exhibitions, The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do, Survivors, Faces of Life After the Holocaust, photographs by Martin Schiller, and The Garden of Stones by Andy Goldsworthy. We're looking forward this fall to when we open Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, our first family exhibition for visitors elementary aged and older, about the incredible story of the Danish rescue. Our work is supported essentially by your donations and membership. Museum members enjoy exclusive programs, member previews to exhibitions, and free admissions to our galleries. Learn more at mjhnyc.org/join. For those of you joining us on the live stream, including my mom, Mom, I'll call you later. I know, 6 o'clock every day, after dinner. Thank you for spending time with us today, wherever you are in the world. We'll be focusing on the full range of what our speakers have to share with us today, and as such, we'll be closing the chat function. We look forward to hearing your feedback on our post-event survey, and thank you for your time. Thank you again for joining us. I'm now pleased to introduce Boris Loshkin, President of the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine.
Hello, everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. On behalf of the Jewish community of Ukraine, it's my honor to welcome you today in the 4th Kyiv Jewish Forum. Today's event is a part of Kyiv Jewish Forum, which is the annual event bringing together top global leaders to discuss and share their insights on the most pressing issues facing Jewish communities worldwide, and especially this year to help motivate international support for Ukraine's independence. I want to thank especially our friends at the indomitable Tablet Magazine, which special thanks to its literary editor, Mr. David Samuels, you will see him in 2 minutes, and chief editor, Alana Newhouse, for their inspired leadership. Thank you. As well as the Tablet's brilliant young journalists who led interviews and conversations that you will be able to watch on Tablet's website and social media channels on February 15th and 16th. We have gathered an array of remarkable and fascinating personalities from America, Israel, the UK, and Ukraine. I encourage you all to tune in. We are here today to take part in what will no doubt be remembered as a historical conversation between two of great and legendary figures of our time. Bernard-Henri Lévy is often described as a filmmaker, author, writer, and public intellectual, all of which is true, yet it would be more precise to describe him as a moral and intellectual oracle of our time. He is a great friend of Ukraine, and I want to congratulate him on the premiere of his new film of Frontline, reportage Slava Ukraini. Thank you. And Natan Sharansky is, on the other hand, will need no introduction here today. A prisoner of conscience who embodied the strength and spirit of resistance of Soviet Jewry, he is also a Ukrainian-born Jew. He has for many years been a great ally of Ukraine. Our gratitude goes out to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for hosting us, especially President Jack Krieger and public programs producer Gabriel Sanders for your generosity and hospitality. Finally, I want to thank all of you here today for your interest and your generosity. Most importantly, the support of Americans and the American Jewish community has been critical for the victory of Ukraine. Thank you for standing with us. Thank you for standing with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you, Boris. You're a tall man. Glory to the heroes. How precious is the idea that life, the life of the individual, has meaning. The people who defend that idea, that spark, who defend it with their lives on the front lines, they are true heroes. Their fight is our fight. The battle to protect the spark that is in each of us, the image of the divine, is never over. Each generation has to defend the idea that we are formed in God's image from the darkness that is also in humankind. In Ukraine, in Iran, in China, in pathogens, in lockdowns, in machines that will substitute their algorithms for our own thoughts, for our own good, of course, in security services that routinely violate our rights here at home. There's a darkness that threatens us all. This museum is a warning against that darkness. There's no one who's experienced intelligence I trust who does not believe that darkness is real and that it is spreading. So what can one spark or two sparks of light do against so much darkness? I had a person I trusted once to answer such questions. He was my grandfather. He grew up in a small shtetl in Ukraine where his father, his mother, his brothers, his sister, his cousins all died bravely fighting back against the Nazis. The record of what we know about their deaths is preserved in the Black Book of Soviet Jewry, along with thousands of other deaths in other villages, the same villages that are being destroyed today by Putin and his army of criminals. My grandfather survived to sell fruit in the immigrant quarter of Montreal. The darkness had taken his entire family, but he still believed in goodness and in justice. Other shopkeepers on Main Street used to come to him to settle their disputes. I loved him so much that I used to watch him sleep when he came home from work. When I was maybe 11 years old, I asked him, "What can one person do against all the darkness in the world?" He told me that he had asked his mother back in Ukraine the same question when he was a child. She had answered him with the story of the Lamed Vav, the 36 righteous people on whose account God does not destroy the world. Who are these 36 people? I asked my grandfather. Where can I find them? Every person you see on the street might be one of the Lamed Vav, my grandfather answered me. They could be anyone. They could be a beggar or even a prince. If you ask them, will they tell you? I wanted to know. Probably not, he answered me. They may not even know themselves that they are among the Lamed Vav. Now, Natan Sharansky and Bernard-Henri Lévy would be the first ones to ridicule the idea that they are among the 36 righteous people on whom the world depends. I'm not a rabbi, so I can't say so either. But I can tell you both how grateful I am that you're here with us tonight. I can also tell you that if the world doesn't depend on Natan and Bernard for its very existence, they're definitely the people on whom the rest of us depend for wisdom, insight, for examples of real courage and how to live. Natan, you helped in the most direct of ways to free our people, including the half of my family that now lives in Israel, from the prison of the Soviet Union. The 9 years you spent as a prisoner of conscience in Siberia helped set off a chain reaction that brought down a criminal empire and freed hundreds of millions of people in Russia, Poland, Ukraine, and elsewhere. There's no one more qualified anywhere in the world than you to speak about freedom and tyranny. And thank you for coming here. Bernard, You are the modern philosopher who saw clearly the barbarism with a human face, as you called it, which your elders and peers and even people today insisted was the future of humankind. In Bosnia, where I traveled as a young reporter, you were the man who wore a suit during the siege, the representative of European civilization who would not let Europe look away from the barbarism in its own midst. You helped open the city, and you brought Francois Mitterrand to Sarajevo. In doing so, you helped stop a genocide. I saw it with my own eyes. You embody the will to see. Your refusal to look away makes it harder for the rest of us and for our governments to look away. Thank you. Jews don't need any more Nobel Prizes. We need to listen to Natan and to Bernard. Today we honor you here, along with the heroes of Ukraine. Thank you.
Taking good care of short people, you know. Yeah. Well, dear friends, I don't see your faces, but I just heard that Abe Foxman and George Klein are here. I welcome them, great allies in the struggle for Soviet Jewry. And I'm also glad for this opportunity, maybe first time publicly, to say thanks to Bernard-Henri Lévy for his support, enthusiastic support of him leading the group of young French Jewish intellectuals when my wife came to Paris many years ago to fight for my release. Thank you. Well, dear friends, we agreed with Bernard. He just came. She spends all the time in Ukraine in the battles. So I'll speak a little bit about history as I saw it, of developing relations between Ukrainian dissidents, Jews, and Russia, and then when we'll come to the war, of course, Bernard can say much more. So I was born in Ukraine, in Donetsk, which then was called Stalino, in 1948. And then to think that next war will be between Russia and Ukraine was simply crazy, because Russians and Ukrainians were two leading nations. When I was 6 years old, there was a big celebration of voluntary unification of Russia and Ukraine, 300 years of voluntary unification of Russia and Ukraine at the times of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And this brotherhood between Russia and Ukraine is the base of this big Soviet Union. That's the spirit in which we grew. And in fact, there were 100 nationalities, and what was written in the ID, whether you are Russian, Ukrainian, or Georgian, or Armenian, didn't matter. The only thing which mattered if you are not Jew. Because Jews, there is a discrimination. And there was nothing Jewish in our life except from anti-Semitism. And so we grew with this feeling that we are Jewish because they are anti-Semites. You know, there is a very interesting book of Sartre, Anti-Semite and Jew. And by the way, it's very good in analyzing anti-Semite and very shallow in analyzing Jew, because Jews that he knew were assimilated. And he wrote that it is anti-Semite who defines Jew. For Jews that he knew, assimilated Jew, it's true. And so it was true for us. Only because of anti-Semites, we knew that we are Jewish. And this discrimination was permanent when you are discussing what university you can go, what kind of career you can do. The fact that you are Jewish is a very negative thing. So from time to time you hear about Ukrainian nationals. But there is no discrimination of Ukrainians. So they can go to the university, they can go make any career. Why are they complaining? That was the feeling, because identity doesn't mean anything except of discrimination not. That was my first meeting. Then I became, after 1967, Israel entered our life, Zionism entered our life. You discover your history, you discover your people, you discover culture, tradition, you discover your identity. And that's what gives you strength to fight for freedom. And fighting for freedom, you meet with many other dissidents. When we created Helsinki Group, monitoring violations of Soviet Union of human rights, the next group which was created was Helsinki group in Kiev. And so Kiev dissidents came, and I had to organize for them press conference. And so here I, for the first time, heard what it means, Ukrainian nationals. They explained that there was no volunteer reunification between Russia and Ukraine. There was enslaving of Ukrainian peasants into the Russian slavery system of their peasants. And they say, you saw in the school, there is no Ukrainian history. It's a small part of Russian history and traditions. And so you understand that exactly as you want to belong to your own history, they also want to belong to their history. And you discover that, in fact, it is good when people believe in freedom and human rights. It's good that they have strong identities, because later, when we all will be in prison and confronting KGB, it's the people with strong identities, there is much less chance that they'll be working for KGB, that they'll be informers. So you discover that, in fact, there is broad spheres of understanding, supporting one another. That's how I became friendly with Ukrainian nationals, but also with Romanian, with Lithuanian. And then we are in prison. We are all in prison, and we all believe that Soviet Union will fall apart. While American Sovietologists believe that it's forever, we know that the system which puts so much energy in keeping control over the millions, hundreds of millions of people will fall apart. And we are describing the scripts, how it will happen. And it always was beginning in the Eastern Europe, because we were children of Prague Spring when Czechoslovakia tried to be independent and Soviet Union sent tanks. And when we were in prison, there was solidarity when Poland tried to become independent. And so we all believed that it's there. Another year, it will explode. And then it will go to Baltics and Caucasus and Ukraine. And the moment Ukraine will become independent in our scripts, that will be the end of Soviet Union. Well, then, in the meantime, American president made his famous Evil Empire speech, which inspired all of us in prison. Soviet Union is under big pressure. Comes Gorbachev, releases political prisoners. We are released, and then opens the gates of the Soviet Union. Massive aliyah, massive Jewish immigration starts. Your family including. Yeah. So, and then, as it was expected, people want to run back to their identities, to Christians, to Armenians, to Ukrainians, and so on. And Gorbachev is in panic, because he didn't mean it. He wanted communism with human face, as they were saying. So he sends troops to Tbilisi, and he sends troops to Vilna, and he himself tries to convince people not to destroy Soviet Union. And just in these days, I'm meeting with President Bush, father, of course, in 1990, and I come to him to speak about the challenges of direct flights to Israel. There started 15,000 Jews coming every month. We still don't have diplomatic relations. We don't have direct flights, if he can help. And Bush was not considered to be a big friend of Jewish community, but in fact, I have to say, each time it was about Soviet Jewry and Ethiopian Jewry, he was of tremendous help. But then after we discussed it, he said, and I have a question to you. You know, I'm thinking now to go to Kyiv. And I'm thinking, what arguments you can recommend me to make in order to convince them to stay in the Soviet Union? So I say, why should the leader of the free world ask them to stay in the Soviet Union? He said, but you understand, Gorbachev is a guy that we can rely on. We know that he's not going to use nuclear weapons. We know that we can have deal with him. And he wants good for all his people. If it will be all different states, who knows what they will do with the nuclear weapons? Who knows what will happen with the stability? Well, I, of course, said that I don't think that there is anything what can be said to people to stay. They were in slavery for 300 years. Now they are going to be free. Well, I'm not the only one who spoke to President Bush, so I can't take any credit for the fact that then he went to Kyiv and made his famous or infamous Kyiv chicken Kyiv speech, when President of the United States, few months before these people voted to become independent, called them to stay in the Soviet Union. So that, in spite of it, Soviet Union fell apart, and here we have independent Ukraine and independent Russia, and this new exciting world. And I'm Minister of Industry Trade in Israel, and I'm coming with my first visit to Moscow and then to Kiev with a big group of industrialists. And then in Kiev, they gave me an airplane to go for a few hours to Donetsk to see how really everybody is so happy to enjoy this new freedom. And then some years after this, all these businessmen who came with me say that they cannot deal, both in Moscow and in Kiev, with business because it's not transparent, it's all corrupt, you can never know with whom you're dealing with. And I have to say, there was almost no difference between Russia and Ukraine because in both countries they were very weak on the developing civil society institutions. And this quick privatization brought to the rising of oligarchs connected to politicians and so on and so on. So what is the difference between Russia and Ukraine? Which is one small difference which turned into the huge difference in the fates of these countries. In the last 22 years in Ukraine, there were 5 presidents. And each of the presidents was coming, speaking about the corruption of the previous one. And criticizing for this and this and this. And that had very tough elections, competition between 2 or 3 people always. At the same time, in Russia, there was one leader who, from the moment that he came to power, he made sure that there will be, that he will have full control of the press, simply 2 oligarchs who controlled 2 independent channels and who helped him to come to power, we immediately sent to exile in order he will have control. And then he made sure that he will have control over financing of all the parties. And then he made sure that all the corruption will work only for those who are loyal to him, and so on and so on. And he guaranteed to him, he changed constitution. I mean, for 22 years he is now the leader, and he is guaranteed by law already to be the leader until for another 11 years, and then whatever. So this small difference defines everything. Because in Ukraine, the leaders are dependent on their people. And they're interested to deliver goods. In Russia, people depend on the leader, as every dictator. And as a dictator, in order to control them, he needs repressions, and he needs external enemy. He needs mobilization, he needs a mission. And he has this mission. His mission is to restore Russian Empire. And he believes, and he said it in private meetings, that the biggest, he told also to me that the biggest strategy of the last century is the falling of Soviet Union. And then he is not making secrets, the greatest leaders were Peter the Great, Ekaterina the Great, and Stalin. And he wants to continue it. And so, as a result, this war in Georgia, and the result Crimea, and as a result, the last barbaric aggression, which today, tomorrow is 1 year. And not tomorrow, well, in these days. So he started from saying that Ukrainians are not a nation, and he goes to fight the neo-Nazis. And he finished a few days ago saying that we have a very important victory. We brought new lands to Russia. I have to say both slogans are very good for internal consumption. First of all, it's important for Russian people to know that those who fought against Nazis continue to fight against Nazis. They are the only nation which can stand against. And second, in the line with Russian Tsars, we are bringing new lands to Russia. That was the main compliment of the Russian Tsars for hundreds of years. They were saying, assembling the new lands to Russian Empire. So that's the reason why we have such an awful, barbaric aggression. And again, unfortunately, there are even now there are voices that let's find compromise. Let's agree about some small pieces of land which Russia will get, and let's finish with this conflict. Ukrainian people know that it's impossible. I met with President Zelensky, and of course he is fully in this struggle. But even if he would agree at some moment to have a compromise, his people will not agree. And they understand very well that all these conversations about stability after this is nonsense, because dictator needs to continue it all the time. He will need, the moment he sees that it works, as it worked in Crimea, now if it will work with Mariupol, and with Kherson or Donetsk, Lugansk, he will continue to do it for his own stability, for his own continuity to control this. So that's why Ukrainians understand that if they want to be free, they have to fight. But their fight is also in the interest of all the free world. And from here come two very important topics, which I hope I'll have an opportunity to discuss later. What are the relations between Ukraine and Israel, and what are relations between Jewish people and Ukrainian people? But the most important thing is now to remember that Ukraine is fighting for its right to be a free nation, is bringing back good name to the word nationalism, what we Israelis need so much, because unfortunately this word became like a curse. And when we are saying Jewish democratic state, they say, why do we need to be Jewish? Because of this we have all these problems. And suddenly everybody loves Ukraine, and Ukraine insists we want to be Ukrainian democratic state, and fighting for their independence and freedom. They're fighting for the future of all the free world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Boris. Thank you, my dear friend, David. Such a pleasure and an honor to be back with Tablet. And thank you, Natan. You have been and you still are such a hero for me. I remember this time in my youth where the name of Natan Sharansky meant probably something similar to what the name of Navalny means to young generation of today. An Iron Man fighting against the granitic dictatorship of the Russia of this time. And to meet him in flesh, vibrant, in live, younger than ever, for me, is a great pleasure and a great honor too. I must say that I'm very happy also to speak about Ukraine in New York, in this place, and under this title, Freedom and Tyranny. In New York, because I have never felt the West, the Western values, and America as much under attack as they are today, and because I did not see since a long time such a champion of the Western values and of the best of America than the Ukrainian people. The West has been under attack structurally since ever. We are in a moment when the attack comes from many places. It comes from the old Chinese empire pretending to revive. It comes from Iran and the old Persian empire pretending to get the most devilish and dangerous weapons in the world. It comes from the Sunni Muslim world, the radical wing of it, which is Al-Qaeda, Daesh, whatever. The attacks come from the new Turkey, not Turkey as itself. Poor Turkey, by the way, today. But it comes from the neo-Ottoman dream of a crazy dictator, a dictator for his people and aggressive towards the West, who is Erdogan. And the attack comes from the king of those bad kings, who is Vladimir Putin. And today, in front of this attack coming from everywhere, against that, there are some forces, of course, the Kurds, the Afghan people who refuse the rule of Taliban, and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are the champion of European, American values. The champions. They are those who fight on the ground, for themselves, of course, but for all of us. And by the way, I had the occasion recently, a few days ago, to say to a very prominent leader of the West that when Zelensky asked for weapons, when he asked for armored tanks, when he asked for planes, he was not asking them for him, and he did not ask us to deprive ourselves. He just asked for a displacement of the heavy weapons to the new border of the world where democratic values have a still, and more than ever maybe, a strong meaning. So for me, to speak of the fate of Ukraine here in New York is a treat and very important. Very important to speak in this place. I was here a few years ago when I had the privilege to screen my previous movie, Peshmerga, in this very place. 2018 maybe, I don't remember well, 17, 18. It's the second time I come on this stage, and it has a lot of meaning for me. Natan says that we just said that we will speak later about the relationship between Ukraine and her Jews or the world Jewry, but I can already say maybe a few words, and we will elaborate. A country where the day of Hanukkah, a gigantic menorah is put on the Times Square of the place of Kiev, which is the Maidan, the day of Hanukkah. A country whose heroes, like the heroes of Azovstal, when they are liberated from the Russian jails, go to Israel, go to Masada, pray, and elaborate about the relationship of their fight with the antique fight of the Jews for their freedom. A country able to elect 75% or so, a Jewish president who never made any mystery about his Jewishness. This country has a very special relationship to Jewry, to Jewishness, and to Israel. Maybe we will speak of that later. And for me, it has a lot of meaning, coming back from Ukraine, coming back from Frontline, just finishing a film called Slava Ukraini, which some of you will see probably tonight. It has a great meaning to say these few words and to make this introduction in the Museum of Jewish Heritage. For me, it's absolutely crucial, and I hear in my country, and also a little here, so many stupidities about Ukraine and the Jews that the very fact that we, David Samuel, Natan Sharansky, as myself, are here today is as itself a statement. I understand it, as far as I'm concerned, at least this way. Third point, I'm happy and honored to give these few remarks under this banner, freedom and tyranny. As I told you, I am back from there. I spent really most of this last year between Kharkiv, Kherson, Bakhmut, Zaporizhzhia, and other places. I just finished a movie. I just finished the editing of it, which will be released very soon in France, and I hope not so late in America, covering the last 6 months of this year. I was not there constantly. It would have been physically unbearable for me, but I was there a lot since the 1st of September, and in fact since the 24th of February. When I think of my home, it is in Paris, but it may be more in Kiev and in all those front lines. So I say that to mean that I am probably not such a bad witness about what is at stake in this war in Ukraine. And what is at stake is exactly what we have behind me and in front of you. We have what Clausewitz, the great philosopher of war, called, in opposition to an interstate war, what he called an absolute war. Clausewitz made the distinction: interstate war, which is a war between two states who have their own state, nation interest, right or wrong, but they pursue those interests. And he said there is some absolute war, which are wars where each of the two countries pretends, on top of his interest, to embody some values, and not only pretends, but does fight in order to make these values prevail. Ukraine is one of the most perfect examples I saw in my life of one of those absolute wars. Putin on his side, I have no direct witness of that, but when the meaning of the war he decided to launch against Ukraine is not only to enlarge his space, not only to revive the old Russian Empire, not only because he believed that the collapse of Soviet Union is the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of our times. He really launched this war because he thinks that democracy is a calamity, that democracy is a disaster, that democracy at his borders is a plague, which can only contaminate his country. And when Putin says denazification, what he means is de-democratization, by an horrible twist of the language, by a horrible negationist, revisionist, hysterical twist of words. He really means de-democratization. This is the sense which this war has on the Russian side. And those who fight today in Bakhmut, for example, I was not there in the last weeks. I was in Bakhmut in November, but it was already, though less harsh than today, but it was the same situation. The Ukrainians had in front of them Chechen fighters of Kadyrov and Wagner gangsters of Prigozhin. This is the army of Russia. Those are the inheritors of those whom Putin invokes on and on, the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. On the Russian side, to be inheritor of the great patriotic war, Second World War, means to recruit some gangsters in the jails of Moscow, to recruit some killers from the Kadyrov group, to transform them into some meat waves, and to send them on front line. On the other side, in Bakhmut, as in Kharkiv, as in Kherson, as in Ulaipole, in all the places where I were and where I spent as time as I could, I found some commanders, some soldiers, who first of all were very often volunteers. Weapons were not their skill. They were not trained all their life to do war. Sometimes they just had a few weeks to train themselves. They were teachers, workers, doctors, whatever, volunteers. Not all of them were young. A lot of them were middle-aged, and sometimes not as old as me, but sometimes a little old too. Volunteers. An army of citizens, which is the very first difference and which is one of the first meanings of a democratic, of a freedom army. An army for freedom is first of all an army where the civilians, the citizens have their place, have their space. Number two, it's an army who takes a great care about civilians. As you know, one of the horror of the wars of today, one of the new horrible laws of the new wars is that they don't make the difference between soldiers and civilians. Since 1914, till today, the proportion in those dead in combat of professional soldiers and civilians has dramatically reversed. More and more civilians regarding professional soldiers. This is the modern wars. In Ukraine, they are not angels. There is no angels people anywhere. But they have the concern, they have the will, they have the determination, and they take the decisions in order to implement this determination of sparing as much as they can the civilian lives. I saw, for example, and those who will see my film will check that, the way in which the battle for Kherson, the liberation of Kherson, was prepared. It took some time. And it took some time because the Ukrainians did all that was possible to put the civilians out of the game, to protect them, to have them sheltered. In this way, they acted, I saw them act in Borislav, in all the cities around Kherson where I was. In the last 3, 4, 5 weeks before the attack, they acted like the Israeli army when they are confronted, when they are engaged in a war for its own, for Israel's own survival. And this way, when you are fighting for your survival, to think of the possible collateral horrible word to mean civilian victims, this way is the honor of an army and is the honor of a country. And this, I found it at every step of this long and sometimes hellish journey which I did. An army fighting for freedom is also an army who takes care of the enemy. The Russians, as far as I know, don't do as little as possible prisoners. And when they do prisoners like the Azovstal battalion fighters, remember Olenivka, this huge jail where you had hundreds of prisoners of the regiment who defended Mariupol during weeks. They were bombed from inside, hundreds of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, were killed by this bombing. They were properly murdered by their guardians, by those who detained them in jail. So even when there are some prisoners, the Russians, the earlier they can get rid of them, even through killing, the best. On the Ukrainian side, I saw and I filmed. It is one of the important sequences of the film which I directed and just finished to edit. I saw the so sophisticated process of encouraging the adversary, the Russians, to surrender. It starts from the videos taped and spread by the Ukrainian officials, President Zelensky, Minister Reznikov, inviting the Russians not to risk their life, telling them that they have still the choice to choose the life. And it goes still, what I saw and filmed, very intelligent process. Ukrainians put in motion a hotline on one of those channels, I think it is Telegram, allowing a Russian soldier who wants to stay alive, to send his GPS position, to deliver the message that he's ready to surrender. And it permits a unit of Ukrainian soldiers to go, very cautiously, of course, because it can always be a trap, to take him and to arrest him. I saw that. And this, again, is a very civilized way of making war. It's one of the ways where this horrible thing, which is war, matches with the values of citizenship and freedom. And last point, and I will finish with that, last point, a free army. Since the night of the time, since millenaries, since the famous speech of Pericles to the city of Athens, the address to the dead Athenians, dead in the Guerre du Peloponnèse. Pericles addresses a great speech where he addresses his regards to the dead heroes, and when he defines what is the army of a democracy. What is the difference between the army of a democracy and the army of oligarchic, tyrannic, or imperial state? And he said that the difference is the following. A democratic army is an army where each soldier defends two things: his ground and the sky of the values in which he believes. When you defend your home and when you defend the value which is higher than you, when you defend the city of Athens and the values of the philosophy of Heraclitus, let's say, then you are a democratic army. Today, the Ukrainian soldiers, they defend their family, they defend their land, but all those whom I had the chance and the privilege to interview, really all of them, told me we also are defending values of democracy, a certain form of regime, a certain conception of government, and the values of Europe. And really, when you hear that once, twice, three times, it can be words, 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 words. When you hear that everywhere, from sophisticated intellectuals at war to simple citizens just there and fighting too, it means something. It means that you are in front of quite a different army, opposite to the Putins and the Wagner's one, and faithful to the inner heritage of Pericles. And I must add that in this famous speech of Pericles, Pericles says that in these sort of wars, when on one side you have people who don't know why they fight, when on the other side you have an army who knows that she is fighting for a sky of values, the victory always, whatever the technicity, whatever the number of soldiers, whatever the weapons, always goes to those who defend values a little higher than themselves. That's why I finished this movie, and I will finish these small remarks by telling you that I believe strongly in the victory of Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!
Now, Natan, we've heard these stirring words from Bernard. Can you explain why the Israeli government has been so quiet, so cautious when it comes to support for its fellow democratic state, Ukraine?
Yes, well, that's a tough question, but it's very important to know the facts and the reasons behind these facts. I have to say, well, first of all, support of public opinion in Israel to Ukraine is overwhelming. Definitely, by the way, the polls show that among Jewish population it's absolutely overwhelming. Among Arab it's a little bit more complicated, but altogether it's overwhelming. The humanitarian assistance, beginning from the hospital, field hospital, which I think no other country did, and hundreds of doctors and social workers, post-trauma projects, it goes all the time, every day, and through different organizations. In addition to humanitarian assistance, there are some much more sensitive fields about which they prefer not to speak to, where also there is a lot of support. At the same time, Israel doesn't give Ukraine the weapons which it asks, and not for attacks, not for defense. And I have to say, in fact, taking from the very first day of the war position that Israel has to give everything what Ukrainians ask, because I was very embarrassed or felt not comfortable when President Sharansky tells me, I can't understand as a Jew, as a big sympathizer of Israel, and as an Ukrainian leader, when we learn so much from Israel, when we admire so much Israel, I believe that Israel will be the first to help us with the weapons, and Israel is only Hungary and Israel are the only countries of the free world that don't give us weapons. So and I give him all the reasons and I explain my position, still I feel I don't have good answers. At the same time, and that's an important sense, when I speak to all the top Israelis responsible for defense of Israel, and when they explain me why they cannot do it, with all their sympathy and support, I have to say I also don't have good arguments for them. And here it's important to understand what they're saying. And I'm speaking now about every top Israeli official responsible for security of the State of Israel. He says, this state was created to defend Jewish people from destruction. We have the enemy, Iran, which is planning every day our destruction. We have practically every night, to attack the bases of Iran in Syria. to attack the columns of the weapon coming to Hezbollah. And in the last weeks, even to attack the very important targets in Iran. Of course, Ukraine partially benefits from this because they destroyed the plant of drones, but we are doing it to save Israel. And it so happened, it was the weakness of the free world, personal weakness of the President of the United States at that moment, that the world accepted that Putin controls all the airspace of Syria. And we have, doing these attacks every day, we need at least silent agreement or whatever understanding of Putin. And it is clear that if we give, the moment we give real weapon to Ukraine, Putin will make it much more difficult for us to attack it. That's what military say. And I can argue with them, and I have many arguments why it is wrong, but I am not specialist in military. And then politicians, and I am talking about the leading Israeli politicians, what they are saying. They're saying, look, it's great that all the free world is now supporting Ukraine, and we are fully there. But the same free world tries at this same time to reach agreement with Iran. And in 2015, we paid such a big price for all these billions which moved to Iran. $500 million which moved in suitcases and cash directly from Washington to Iran. It turned Hezbollah into the big army, from partisan army to the big army in a few weeks. And we had to deal with this. Now, the same free world which is fighting Putin is ready. Definitely Europe is ready, and America, even with all this, is not ready to say, no, we'll have no deal with Iran. And we again, so we will have to fight this alone. And so it's, I have to say, it's absolutely crazy situation. On one hand, I think that it's shame that Israel is not fully with Ukraine. On the other hand, when we have this situation that there are two biggest evils in the world, well, Bernard will say there are 10 biggest evils, just now he counted, but let's say Putin's Russia and Iran. And the West is helping to Ukraine to fight Putin, and tries to appease Iran. And Israel has to fight Iran and tries not to irritate Putin. So what is really needed? It's true that Israel has to take absolutely clear moral position. But for this, what is needed, what I have to say to my leaders when I argue with them, the West has to take very clear moral position. We heard the voice of Iranian dissidents, we heard the voice of the neighbors. This regime has to be changed. There can be no appeasement, no new treaties with Iran. And then it will be much easier also for me and the others to demand from Israel to take much more clear position.
Bernard. Hello. Bernard, you have been one of the foremost champions in the West of the Ukrainian fight. But you must hear all the time, right? Why can't we reach a deal? Why don't we feed the crocodile another little slice of Donbass, let them keep Crimea, which they already have? Otherwise, if you continue playing this game, after all, Putin has 2,000 nuclear weapons. They're mounted on missiles, and anytime he wants, he can send one of them to Paris, to London, and end this little toy soldier game. And so why don't you be careful, and don't we know how this is going to end in 1 month or 3 months or 6 months anyway?
The reply is rather simple, because if we did so, if we gave to the crocodile part of what he wants, part of Donbass, of Crimea, we would not diminish, we would increase the risks of escalation, of nuclear weapons, and so on. Because what would be the meaning of this gift to the crocodile. It would mean if one threats of a nuclear attack, then he gains. Then he gets what he wants. He gets his targets of war. It would be terrible lesson from Russia itself. After that, they will ask the other parts of Donbass, other parts. After that, they will ask Moldavia, and they will ask Baltic state with the same argument. Be careful, we are more and more determined to throw a missile or a dirty weapon to Bakhmut or to Warsaw. What will you do? Logic will do the same. It is endless. More than that, I am among those who believe, and I am sure you are too, we read carefully Albert Camus and all those who in the 50s gave the warning, the alert on the risk of nuclear proliferation. If we accept this blackmail, so many countries in the world would say, my goodness, the best way to get what we want is to exert the nuclear threat. Immediately, they will run from equipping themselves with such weapons. We would have to face a never-seen proliferation of nuclear weapons. Everyone will want these sort of weapons if they know that having that is enough to terrorize Israel, America, France, all the West, and to get what they want. So I know it is a risky situation. I know that nobody can nobody can joke with this threat. And we are in a tragic situation. This is sure. It is not a frivole situation. It is tragic. But I thought about this long and long. In Paris, in front of my white sheet of paper, in the trenches of Donbass, when I had nights with nothing else to do than to think about the future of my family, children, grandchildren, and friends. And I arrived to the conclusion that it would be much more tragic. The risk would be much higher if we accepted the blackmail. Alas, we have no other option than to say no to the nuclear, therefore hyper-terrorist blackmail of Russia. About Israel, if I may add a few, two words. I could not agree more with Natan. Civil society, for sure. I know that less well than you, but I come often enough to Israel to know that civil society is in favor of Ukraine. Moreover, you have today some Israeli soldiers, volunteers, fighting on the side of Ukraine. I saw that, I filmed that, and I know it for sure. So the morale of Israel, the ethical values of Israel are on the side of Ukraine. In front of that, there is this decision of political class, which I can, and military. Part of me understands. And you know, I love Israel, and I am an unconditional defender of Israel since 60 years now, 60 years. So I understand that they are not in the same situation of America or even France, and they have the Hezbollah, therefore Russian missiles, at their gate, at their door. I completely understand that. But again, I think that by fearing that, by being afraid of that, by playing it so low, I think that they increase the risk. I think that Russia and Iran are so tight now, are so united. I saw the drones of Iran. You will see in my movie tonight, there is 2 moments of the film when I have literally Iranian drones again above the heads of my team. They are here, Iranians, delivered to Russians and activated by Russians. If ever, which God forbids, Russia won the war, imagine the advantage, imagine the gain, imagine the moral victory for the Ayatollah. It will be a disaster. So the unconditional friend of Israel, whom I am first, before everything, or nearly everything, really thinks from the bottom of his heart that Israel should wish as much as you do in America, want for the victory of Ukraine and do all that they can to accelerate, to speed this victory.
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with you, and almost every day I'm making this speech with some other arguments to Israeli leaders. But if there is hope that it will be changed, and now at this moment there is very serious review, it's exactly because Iran and Russia become so close that it's already absolutely impossible to deal with one and to fight with one and to appease the other. Yes.
And on this point, for both of you, there's a question of U.S. policy, right? Because the war in Ukraine did not start a year ago. The war in Ukraine started 8 years ago with the invasion of Crimea and with the taking of large sections of Donbass. 14,000 Ukrainians died before the February invasion. And as you know, Bernard, you were there, the fighting was constant, right? And it's in turn impossible to separate the fighting, the war that has been going on in Ukraine for the last 8 or 9 years from the attempt by the US to appease the government of Iran and leave them just short of or in possession of nuclear capacity. This has all been one story, right? The pieces of Ukraine that were given to Putin were given to Putin in exchange for his support of Iran inside of Syria, where they massacred over 500,000 Syrian civilians in a horrific war, which was allowed to happen by the US because Syria was an Iranian equity. And for America and Iran to reach a nuclear deal, Iran's position in Syria had to be secure, and the only power that was capable of securing that position was Russia. Again, when it came to the nuclear deal itself and to providing security at the reactors and for nuclear material, again, the partner that was chosen was Russia. What was the payment that Russia received? It received Syria and it received slices of Ukraine. Now, 3/4 of the way down that path, 80% of the way down that path, right? Ukrainians resist an outright Russian invasion. Boris Johnson and the US back Ukraine, assuming the war will be over in a few weeks. It wasn't over, right? The Ukrainians fought. Now there's a moment to reconsider this policy. But this policy has been going on, Natan, as you pointed out, for almost a decade, and these two fights are not separable. They've become inseparable from each other. These two countries in their defense policy, in their foreign policy, Iran and Russia, have become even more tightly bound up together. And I'd like both of you to talk about that.
Well, first of all, you made a lot of suppositions, which I don't know. Maybe you're right 100%. Maybe some of them is hypothetical. What I do know from all my experience dealing with Russians, if the West was strong enough in its response when Russia went to Georgia, there'll be no aggression in Ukraine. Georgia was the first serious attempt after Chechnya of Putin to start rebuild the empire. And whether Georgia gave a unbelievable resistance. Small country, nothing. And Putin got 20% of its territory, and the world accepted it. Nobody liked it, so I think no doubt there was a big encouragement for Putin. Then there was a moment of big weakness of the West when President Obama said that if Syria will use chemical weapon, our response, military response, will be very strong. And then they used chemical weapons against the peaceful population, and Obama decided not to respond. That was a moment of big weakness, and as a result came two things. Russia sent troops to Syria, and Russia, after checking in again, decided to conquer Crimea. When I was speaking with the Secretary of State Blinken a year ago, before the war, he agreed with me that it was a mistake. He was there, that it was a mistake, and that occupation of Syria by Russia is direct result of this. He didn't agree that Ukraine was because of this. But from all what I know from Moscow, they were checking again whether there'll be reaction of Moscow, of America. They first started sending the local citizens, as they come. Then volunteers from Russia coming. For 2 weeks, they were checking and checking. And then they did it. Okay, the world didn't greet it. The world condemned it. But in fact, the world accepted it. And so the fact that, of course, gave new confidence to Putin, that's for sure. As to other suppositions, which I don't know.
Bernard.
I believe in the KKK theorem or theory. Not Ku Klux Klan. Kurdistan, Kabul, Kiev.
Yeah.
The three are absolutely interconnected. America and the West gave a terrible signal when they betrayed Kurdistan.
Yeah.
Kurdistan were our allies in the fight against Daesh. When we thought that the war was finished, was over, we left completely, we dropped flat the Kurds. In Iraq, when they were against their supposed federal state of Baghdad, and in Syria, when they tried to build a confederal and autonomous entity. We dropped them. It started, this is a line which started with Obama, with Syria, the red line, and which ended with Trump, and it was the same. When Trump said Rex Tillerson to the Barzani president, and when he sent a message to General Masloum Kobane in Syria, the message was, there will be no one on the phone if we called for rescue and for help. Do what you want, do what you can in front of Baghdad, which means Iran, and inside of Syria, which means also Iran and Turkey. Okay, this was the first K. The second K was Kabul. Kabul will remain as a big mystery, a big enigma for the historians of the future. The war against terror in Afghanistan was in good path. There was less and less American soldiers. There was, since 2 years, maybe 1.5, I have to check, no American casualties. There was 25 less soldiers in Afghanistan than in Germany, probably, or in Australia, or in many places. It was a symbolical presence which was enough, which was sufficient to keep at large and to keep in respect the Taliban forces. And in fact, the Taliban were afraid. I was there for you, for Tablet. I saw how just because of this vague threat of the handful of US military soldiers, the Taliban kept quiet. They stepped out at night, they went back in the morning, and the life was so-so. The women were more and more free, a free press was building itself, and a true civil society was under building. Suddenly, Joe Biden, Trump first, decided, and Joe Biden ratified and endorsed the decision to withdraw, which is absolutely unexplainable. Second case. The third one, the idea that Kyiv was reachable, that Kyiv will fall in a few weeks, that nobody will come in support, that nobody will, that everyone will look elsewhere. This decision was taken because of all that you said, because of the Iran treaty also, but because of that. Put yourself 1 minute, though difficult it is, in the mind of a Putinian ideologue. You see that. You see an America and the Europe and the France so weak that they abandon their allies, they betray their champions, they don't give a damn about those. What do? You advance, you make a step more. So it was the one step too much, of course, because now Ukrainian is going to win. But alas, Ukrainian is winning at the cost of so many innocent lives and so much disaster. And there is in that a huge responsibility of the West, of my country, and of yours.
And what do you say to the American voices, and they're getting louder now, especially on the right, that say, enough, $40 billion, you're going to pour weapons that we don't have anymore into this hole, right? What's the limit? This country has plenty of problems. Why shouldn't the money go here? Why is it going there? Let's end it.
Well, I think Bernard partially answered on this in the beginning. That is the war for the future of the free world. And the free world will have to spend much more money and much more victims, much more losses if Putin will not be stopped. Now, yeah, it was expensive, but so the free world is so lucky that there is somebody on the first line who is ready to fight and sacrifice their lives and is asking only for weapons. They're not asking for American troops or for European troops. They're asking only for weapons. I think, by the way, that there was a huge change in America. I was in Washington lobbying for Ukraine in the first few weeks when it seemed that they are even afraid to think about anything except for simple bullets or something like that. And then America started being involved much more seriously. That all the Biden administration made a huge change in their approach then. Today we are coming to the more difficult point when so much money and there can be another $100 billion, who knows. But if you remember that what is, the target is the safety of the free world, and the price can be much bigger, and that we are really blessed that Ukraine is so mobilized and so self-devoted for the sake of its freedom, but also others. So, well, we have only to hope that it will be understood. I think it's understood by mainstream politicians in America, but sometimes people on the margins are having more and more influence because of different factors.
Bernard, what do you think? It's easy to talk about the heroism of other people defending freedom in a different place. What do you make of what's happened to freedoms in Western countries as a result of COVID, lockdowns, the spread of these sort of monopolistic internet platforms that start to regulate thought and expression under the guise of being private corporations? There's something, to me, very frightening about the decay of this idea of freedom in people's hearts here. And you wrote a very passionate book about it during COVID, which I think should be read widely. But I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about that here too.
Yeah, thank you, David. Of course, I wrote this this little book, which was very important for me, and which was a reflection in a Michel Foucault mood about the biopower, about the new rules of regulation and domination in our societies. And I really take that very, very seriously. But for the moment, to be honest, I am obsessed by what happens in Bakhmut. I am obsessed by the situation of the children exfiltrated, deported in Russia, and we are without news of them. And with all the respect I owe and all the sorrow I have for all my friends who died from COVID, I think that if there is a scale of evil, what happens to these children, what happens to Bakhmut is probably not comparable to anything. And for this, for the COVID and for that, the fight has been waged. It is waged. It was won by the scientists, by the doctors, by the campaign for vaccination, and so on. The battle is not lost. Battle for Ukraine, battle for the children. We have to still to wage it and to win it. And about your previous question, which is very important too. What to say to one of these morons of America First, to say, what about our money? Okay? I would speak to them in a way which I generally don't like. I like to speak about values, you know, that's what I like. What I like in America is that it is a country who has a creed. A creed. As you told me one day, there are not so many countries in the world who have a creed, who live on a creed. Few. Israel, maybe France, America. Okay, I like to speak about that, about creed, being faithful to one's creed. But in the case of this guy who would say, what about my billions? I would tell him something which is not very confessable, and I hope there is no press here, but I would tell him two things. Number one, your shitty and bloody weapons, your Abrams tanks and so on, they had never had so much publicity as today. You are going to sell them all over the world. As for France, Caesar cannons. Nobody had ever heard about Caesar cannons. I myself did not know what was a Caesar cannon. Today, everyone in the world, every South Korean, every Indian knows what is a Caesar cannon. One Caesar cannon is an incredible practical work, first of all, on field, and publicity for the... This is what I would say to the morons.
So they have to pay money to Ukraine.
They should pay. Of course, they should pay. Yeah. Yes. And number two, what I would tell him, to the moron and also to a wise American, is that what was cooking 1 year ago, what was on fire, was probably the attack on Taiwan. There was, and everybody in the intelligence agencies in the West, every serious observer knows that there were a serious project cooking of reunifying, quote, China. The project has been delayed a lot. And if Russia is defeated, as I hope with all my heart and as I pray every morning, if Russia is defeated, the project will be delayed for long, for very long. So again, it is in the interest of our countries to see the victory of Ukraine, and not only the defeat, the capitulation of Putin and of Russia. Capitulation, not defeat, not arrangement, not compromise. In these sort of wars, which Clausewitz opposed to the interstate wars, these total wars, there are not so many total wars in history. Total war, absolute war, is a rare phenomenon. The only possible outcome from the Napoleon Wars to the Second World War, passing through World War I, the only possible way is capitulation of the one who launched this. If we have this capitulation, you see, the Chinese will be kept at large, the Iranian threat will be very, very diminished, and the whole world will be much more safe and much more peaceful.
I think we have time for maybe 3 or 4 questions from the audience, if there is anyone who would like to ask. Come.
Hi. First of all, thank you for a wonderful event. And my question is to Mr. Sharansky. In your book, The Case for Freedom, which I think was in 2006, you basically argued that the desire for freedom is natural for everyone. And I believe you discussed the sort of setbacks for freedom that were already beginning in Russia at the time. And you sort of expressed the hope that I think you said that they were sort of speed bumps on the road to freedom. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are today on the prospects for freedom ever happening in Russia.
Well, I think since then there were more and more proofs that people want to live free. We saw Arab Spring when it was discovered that Mubarak is not so popular as people thought, and Assad is definitely not so popular. The fact that there was retreat, the fact that Assad still is at power, it's not because the lack of the desire of people to be free. As to Russia, look, I personally am very upset how far back Putin took Russia. And in fact, in the last few months, it already went back from Brezhnev's Russia more to the direction of Stalin's, not Russia, Soviet Union. But at the same time, you can see how people under the fear to accept this new life of doublethink, but at the same time, there are millions which demonstrate today that they don't accept this regime, whether by leaving and immigrating, whether simply by participating in different internet discussions which it's possible to discuss. So the fact, look, as I say in the book, when French Revolution happened, it didn't bring to civil society. In fact, there was one dictatorship after the other. It took 50 years to build civil society institutions that then you can start speaking about France coming to democracy. In Russia, where there were no civil institutions, it can take hundreds of years. In Ukraine, it takes much less because their Western influence is much bigger and people can use this influence. Well, I spoke about the difference between Russia and Ukraine. My main theme in that book is that, in fact, every people, when they have to face whether they prefer life of doublethink and self-censorship or life without it, they choose life without. Whether the society is ready to build such institutions which protect these freedoms, that's another question. Sometimes the road can be very long. Unfortunately for Russia, it's longer than for some other parts of the Soviet Empire.
Well, I've actually met both of you before, so the topic was always about freedom, so it's a pleasure to see you once again, under the circumstances. But I was reading the last few weeks that about 55 years ago, this same conversation was going on whether to sell jets to Israel. And the same excuses were being made, that it would provoke the Russians to give more deadly planes to the Arabs, and we have to extract more and more promises from the Israelis for this or that. And eventually they gave the planes to them, and the Israelis obliterated all of the Russian proxies. They discredited them all over the Middle East. And frankly, I mean, what is it about people's inability to learn from history?
Well, I don't know. Look, being such a strong supporter of Israel's direct involvement in this war from the very first moment, at the same time, I have to say that it's not some kind of politicians who try to get some popular voice who object, or some cowards. It's people who are defending Israel for all its life, from the threat of full destruction, and are victorious. And they prove again and again they are right. And that's why when these people are saying, in order to fight every night and attack the Iranian bases with the most sophisticated weapons and so on, we need neutrality of Putin, who unfortunately was given control over the skies by the West. I have to say, as the one who is not doing it every night. And for me, it's very, very difficult to stand against this argument. Though I have to say that when I speak on the radio in Israel, say that we have to give weapons to Ukraine, immediately somebody comes to me in the street and says, you are saying only because your children are not at this moment pilots in our airplanes. So you have to understand it's serious problem for Israel. It's not something that they're cowards and we are not cowards. It's not. It's people who have first obligation to defend the state of Israel. I do believe, and I agree with this, that Israel should not be the last who demonstrate that they're afraid of Putin. We showed that we are not afraid of Soviet Union in 67 and 73 when the most sophisticated Soviet weapon was given to our enemies. So that's a big debate. But in the end, it is people who are responsible for the security of Israel who have to make decisions.
I mean, the larger point beyond Israeli policy, I just interviewed Boris Johnson in London, and he made the point, he said, we always debate, should we give them, these shoulder-fired missiles? Should we give them battle tanks? He said, and everything that we debate about giving them, then 3 months later we give it to them, right? So it's like this titration. We shouldn't give them the HIMARS. We shouldn't give them the Challenger tank. We shouldn't give whatever. And then 3 months, 4 months later, those things are on their way.
The
and
same
that's the
will
next
be with Israel. Absolutely.
As a child of Holocaust survivors, a lot of people that I speak to can dredge up sympathy for the Ukrainians as a race of Babi Yar and how they were chewing gum as they shot us in the mass grave. So a lot of people that I know just can't get enough sympathy for the race of Ukraine.
Thank you for saying it, because it was just the topic that I wanted to raise and there was no time. I hear it all the time, and I have to say that there's so many people who died in the Holocaust in my family. And I'm the chairman of the Babi Yar Memorial, and I'm dealing all the time with the victims and the role of many Ukrainians in this stage and so on. And I hear all the time from from very good people and some of my close friends, that they have sympathy to the suffering of every child, but they cannot make themselves feeling solidarity with Ukraine as a state or Ukrainians as a nation, knowing what a terrible history there was with Bogdan Khmelnytsky and with civil war pogroms, which were terrible, and of course with the Holocaust. And, well, I can tell you my answer. And first of all, anti-Semitism is not something which was specific for Ukraine or any other land. Anti-Semitism is the most ancient hatred which arises regularly whenever people need to hate the other, and there are many things written about anti-Semitism. And if you think about some nice places in Alps, in Switzerland, remember that the whole Jewish communities were burnt alive in order to avoid plague there. And if you enjoy traveling to Spain, and the first thing which you see is Ferdinand and Isabel, big heroes of today's history of Spain, the worst enemies who exiled half of Jewish people. And if you think, well, Provence, great place, I enjoyed there, and so only think what Crusaders did there. So if we Jews will start building our relations with the world on the basis of what they did to us, we should better move to the other planet. That's right. Second, our sages are giving very good advice. I'm not a rabbi, but I was advised to read these comments of Rashi on the chapter when Abraham sends Agar and Ishmael to the desert, and Ishmael almost dies from thirst. He has no water. And then God says to Agar, don't be afraid. I'll help to your son as it is, and he helps. And then the parasha comments of our sages is that the angels on the heavens revolted and said, you're helping him? Don't you know how many awful things his people will do to our people? And God says to them, now at this moment, is the child innocent or guilty? And they say innocent. So I'll judge everybody in his time. And that's our parasha. Say that it means that we have to deal with the people at this time. And people at this time, people of Ukraine at this time, not only, as Bernard said, by the way, the lowest level of neo-Nazism in Europe. You have to say that when these neo-Nazis that Putin speaks so much, when they try to go to elections, they didn't get 1%, they didn't get 1/10%. And think about many countries in Europe where it is different. And of course, everything that half of the government is Jewish and openly Jewish. And Zelensky is not only speaking about his Jewishness, but about his deep love to history. So, and they were elected in the free elections. And above all this, that it so happened that God, providence, history put Ukrainian people in such unique position of being defenders of the free world. So let's judge Ukraine in this time as God told us.
It means that I agree totally that we have to close an eye about the past of Ukraine, because today what is very important is freedom and democracy.
No. Why we have to close our eyes? I am dealing with Babi Yar crimes every day, and we insist to publish everything about it. And
Antipathy against Ukrainian from us Jews, but what you said, and I agree 100%, that the fight for freedom and for democracy is worth that we be with the Ukrainians.
No, not enough. Of course, question of democracy and of freedom, but if the Ukrainians were still the anti-Semitic which they have been, if they did not have done the work of memory, of mourning, and of sorrow which they did, I would certainly not support them as much as I do. One of the reasons why I support them with all my heart is because they did the work, because they looked in front of their past. They considered the crimes of their grandfathers of fathers. They decided, though difficult and painful it is, they decided to look at them in the eyes and to make all the works which helps it not to be repeated. I had the honor to be there to represent my country the day of the inauguration of the Babillard Memorial. I'm not a fan of the way the Babillard Memorial is conceived and built, but there is a memorial. And I was there. There was the president of Israel. It was the day before the day before the burial of late President Shimon Peres. There was the president of Germany, president of Israel, president of Poland, president of the EU, Donald Tusk, and I was representing my president, France. And I was there for a few days before. I interviewed the leaders of the Jewish communities, the leaders of the parties, people of the civil society, and so on and so on. And I delivered a speech there in name of myself and of my country, which is available on YouTube. You can find it. And what I said and what I really believed is that there is few examples of a nation doing so thoroughly and so quickly the deep work of digging in the darkest deepness of the crime, put them into light, and doing the job necessary for not repeat them. This is Ukraine of today. This is Babillard. Another thing which goes in the same sense. I was in the Maidan, this was 2016, this inauguration of Babillard. I was on the Maidan in 2014, Revolution of Dignity, great popular uprising, and as in all popular uprising, people say exactly what they want. There is an absolute freedom of speech. There was, on the Sunday, I spoke twice on Maidan, once in February, another time in March. And I spent a reasonable amount of time. And I saw, and I heard, and I tried to read what was the graffitis which were written on the walls. And as I expected, every wise thing could be read, like in May 68 in France, great slogans, great popular imagination, and huge stupidities were written. Of course, as in all moments of complete freedom, everything is said. I observed a very strange thing. The only stupidity which I did not hear, the only stupid or crazy or mad slogan which I did not read on the walls was anti-Semitic slogans. In these moments, February, March, of absolute freedom, where the freedom of expression was total, the only free expression which did not pop out was the anti-Semitic one. This was very strange. Maybe there have been after I left, maybe there was before I came, but I can tell you that during these 2 months, all craziness except this one were all possible, and all possible wise, courageous words also, which was the more important, were written and expressed, and among the craziness, this one was not heard. And as a result, as Natan just said, when the extreme right and anti-Semitic parties run for election, they have the most low level rates of approbation and votes in the polls of all Eastern and Central Europe, and much less than in France. The extreme right-wing party is 15 times weaker in Ukraine than in France. On the opposite side, if you look at Russia, I'm sorry, but it's a fact. This work, which is half done, maybe done for the 3/4, maybe, I don't know, a lot of done by Ukraine. They are very far in the way of memory and of understanding of their own criminal past. They are very far away on the road. The Russia did not start. During the Soviet Union, nothing for Ukraine and for Russia. But since 1989 and 91, the Russia did not start. The work is not even on the way. By the way, last point, I don't know if it is well known here, when the Russians say that the Red Army contributed to liberation of Europe from Nazism. It is true. But what they never say is that inside the Red Army, you had all components of the Soviet Union, including some Ukrainians, of course. Those who liberated the camp of Auschwitz, the army, the part of the Red Army who liberated some extermination camps, first of all Auschwitz, was the first Ukrainian front, which was not only composed by Ukrainians, but who was the majority of the Ukrainians were overrepresented in the first Ukrainian front. And the soldier who had the terrible, dark privilege to enter first in Auschwitz, to first look in what was left of the eyes and of the look of the detainees of Auschwitz, was an Ukrainian Jew called Anatoly Shapira, I think, a tankist on a tank. He was an Ukrainian Jew. He was the first to enter and to liberate Auschwitz. So all of that has to be taken into account when a Jew tries to reflect on this situation and to act properly. And when I decided to engage myself so strongly, to devote all my time, to put part of my life at stake in that, all that I'm saying now was in my mind. I did it not just like by reflex, but also after what I tried to make a deep reflection.
Okay. So the world currently is a very depressing place, and both of you, your very intelligent and succinct analysis, unfortunately hasn't diminished that. So I ask a question to both of you, is as you look forward, say, 10 years, and you balance probabilities of how things will unfold, are you pessimistic or optimistic for the future?
The future of the world, of Ukraine, of Russia, of Israel, of what?
Future of the world.
You want to
I can't.
First of all, I am very optimistic.
I said that you have been my hero for so long, so I leave you the privilege.
Okay.
First the heroes.
Thank you. You are very noble in your permitting me to be the first. Look, first of all, I am very optimistic person, otherwise I would not survive. I believe that the freedom will broaden its border. The free world will be bigger. I believe that, well, as to Putin's regime, I think it will be finished much quicker, and that the war with Ukraine accelerated his end. I think he made a major blow to his own country and to Russian, unfortunately, civilization and all this. And I believe the West will keep with its growing assistance to Ukraine that already in this year which came, we can see how situations change dramatically. And they don't believe that Putin's regime can survive for years if it will be losing. Weak dictator cannot survive in Russia. So here, even in the short run, I'm more optimistic. As the rest, it all depends from the leaders of the free world. Because if they believe in the power of freedom, which is in their hands, and will not try to play with the real politics and all these considerations, like what I was giving example when they recommended to Ukraine to stay in the Soviet Union, or they will be recommending to stop fighting the dictators. I believe that the power of the free world is absolutely tremendous, and that the future is bright. And the fact that in America, not like in Israel, by the way, there are so many polls and studies which show that Americans believe that tomorrow will be worse than today. And in Israel, by the way, it's vice versa. I think it's unfortunate. I think you Americans should be more optimistic.
As for myself, I am naturally pessimistic. But
otherwise, you will not survive.
otherwise, exactly. And I'm optimistic now. I'm optimistic because of Zelensky. Seeing a comedian whom everybody saw as a sort of populist, without real charisma and so on, having become overnight a hero, feeds me with optimism. The day when I heard Zelensky replying to Biden, I did not offering him an exfiltration. When he replied, President, I did not ask you for a taxi, I asked you for weapons, and I stay where I am, naked, in the streets of Kiev, under the threat of shell. There was no, at this time, Iron Dome in Ukraine, as there is in a way today, with Wagner commandos launched in the city to search him, capture and kill him. When I saw that, this birth overnight of a true Churchillian and Jewish hero, it made me optimistic. The birth of a Yehuda Maccabee, of a David, of a young David, a sort of young David, overnight made me optimistic. Ukrainian people, the way in which the average Ukrainian people, the civilians, the ladies, the widows of dead soldiers, the way they act, the way they support the front line, fills me with optimism too. As you know, in a war, in France there is a very famous quote, a Prime Minister of France, Georges Clemenceau, asking to his main general, will you hold, during the First World War, will you hold firm against the German? Will the front line hold? And the general said, yes, the front line will hold if the second line, the rear, holds, the non-combatants. Same. In Ukraine, the non-combatants, which means the civil societies, the old people, even the children, they hold with an incredible braveness and courage, an incredible dignity. And this dignity of victims, again, fills me with optimism. And third thing, what happened, I wrote that in tablets. What happened to your president, President Biden, is a sort of miracle. And a miracle always makes you optimist. This president, who honestly, when the war started, there was a lot of people in this country and abroad who thought that it was getting a little old, that he was embarrassed with the inheritage of his master thinkers, that he had in Kabul and in Syrian Kurdistan followed the trace of Trump and so on. And he said to Zelensky, first reflex, exfiltration. So the decision of the White House was clearly not to put its hands in this affair, in this war. And something happened. I don't know why. He was in Poland. He took a child in his arms, maybe that, I'm not sure. I think there are probably other reasons. But all of a sudden, this man acted as a strong, brave, true, great American president. Yeah. And he decided overnight to support, to deliver all the weapons, nearly all the weapons which were requested to them. And he began to compete with my President Macron for the leadership of the free world. Yes. This also fills me with optimism and joy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both so much. Thank you so much. And thank all of you. Thank you.